You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Toronto Sports Rush channel on YouTube, brought to you, of course, by the Bet Rivers Network. My name is Kyle Andrew. I am joined today by the editor-in-chief of the Fourth Period, host and analyst from Sirius XM NHL and the NHL Network, Mr. David Pagnotta. David, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good, and it's time to keep talking Leafs because there's no such thing as an off-season in Toronto. And we have to start talking about a certain player because your own property, the Fourth Period, reported yesterday on the Leafs are back in contract talks with young Matthew Knies. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, they've obviously categorized him and highlighted him as a priority this offseason to get him locked in, not only at some point this offseason, but they want to do this by the draft. They'd like to be able, that's kind of the timeline, perfect world, get this locked in by draft time, draft week, not have to worry about July, not have to worry about the threat of offer sheets or any of that fun stuff. They've made him one of the top guys on their list. We know Brad Treliving met with Keith Pelly on Sunday. I believe they spoke again, met yesterday. May even be continuing that later today on Tuesday as the week progresses. There was supposed to be a press conference in the early part of the week. We haven't gotten there yet, so I'm expecting in the next couple of days Brad Treliving to address the media. But yeah, Knies is certainly at the top, and they've had discussions throughout the season. Those were kind of tabled once they got down the stretch run and into the playoffs. But yeah, those are back in the equation and will intensify, as the days and the weeks kind of progress here. Everything that I've been told and every indication that I've been given is Knies is likely in that 3, 4, 5 year range. And then the numbers will obviously be dictated by, what the ultimate term is going to be. But all indications are, it's going to be a decent number in the 7 range, higher depending on term.
Yeah. And I'm wondering offhand if the focus on Knies' contract right now is obviously it's due to his age because they want to get him locked up because of his performance this year, just under 60 points. I think he finished 29 and 29.
Yep.
And from that end, are they prioritizing Knies, or is it just more a matter of the type of free agent he is, the type of numbers that we're looking at here, and the fact that, by all indications, he certainly wants to stay. But also we saw throughout the playoffs, the consistent effort looked like he was here and invested in winning with this hockey team.
Yeah, I think the priority list, he checks off a number of boxes with respect to that. You mentioned the age, certainly, part of it. I alluded to the threat of an offer sheet. I don't think it's going to get to that point, but they just want to get that business out of the way because it also allows them to restructure their top 6. He's kind of stabilized himself and solidified himself alongside Austin Matthews' wing on the left side. Almost at 30 goals in his second full NHL season. That's pretty impressive. Not just the fact that he's playing and had played with both Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, but he kept up the pace of play, and his physicality that he brought complemented what they were able to do, at least in the regular season. Things intensify a little bit more in the playoffs. He had a couple more rounds under his belt in terms of experience, and that'll help him out moving forward. But he's the caliber of player that the Leafs have lacked and that they've needed within their top 6. To have a true power forward capable of keeping up and capable of scoring. That's what they've lacked, and that's what they're going to continue to look to add to this group. If they could find somebody else with those similar qualities and qualifications in their top 6, that's what they're going to likely do, once we get to, July 1 around draft. If they go the trade route, Brad Treliving is going to be aggressive, and it's going to be interesting to see, what type of follow-ups he makes after getting Knies locked in. Presumably John Tavares is staying as well. There's a route here to getting a deal done. I think they understand where Mitch is at. Likely going to July 1. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. But they want to have that definitive answer so that they can kind of map out the rest of their plan.
Oh, we'll get to Mitch Marner for certain. But one last note on Knies here is, I think, would you agree that the Florida series, less about Knies and more about exposing the type of hockey player the Leafs need on their roster, especially in their top 6 moving forward, to compete with the Florida? Because Knies, to carve out 30 goals on that top 6 is impressive no matter what, because there's just only so many to go around, of course. But on top of that, his physicality did in some ways separate him from a Mitch Marner. He lacks Marner's polish, but he's young. And the physicality, it just seems like the way the game is going and the way Florida has shown their formula to work to get to and win a Stanley Cup, that's what's going to be needed.
Absolutely. And the definition of power forward has evolved over the years to the point where you need to be able to keep up with the pace of play. You can't just be a big body who can score. You can't be slow anymore. You have to be able to be part of the mix. You have to be able to enter on the rush with the rest of your group. It can't be the guy in the back. You can't strictly be in the corners when it's in the O-zone. You got to be able to kind of spread yourself around a little bit. And that's what's made guys like Matthew Tkachuk so successful. That's what made guys like in the playoffs, Sam Bennett, so successful. It's certainly like he has all the makings of being a very, very, very good hockey player in the National Hockey League. And the Leafs certainly recognize that. They want to be able to keep him in the fold for a while. If it's not going in the 7-8 year direction, maybe it makes more sense for them to keep it on shorter term to still have him controllable before giving him the next big deal. So we'll see kind of again where that ends up falling. But that caliber player, like I said, checks off a lot of boxes for the Maple Leafs. Yeah. And if they can add another similar piece in their top six at some point this offseason, I think that's also one of the priorities for their group.
All right, so speaking of the top six, let's quickly shift to John Tavares. A very, his situation seems almost on the other end of the spectrum on here. He just came off of what can only be described as a renaissance regular season year. Yeah. It was incredible. He carved out himself a ton of points in that top six. But moving forward with him, and given his age and given the number of kilometers on the odometer and whatnot, is it a priority to have him stay, or is it completely dictated by the terms of what he's looking for? Because frankly, that regular season, he is going to be able to ask for a pretty princely sum.
If he wants, certainly, and he'd be justified certainly to do it. But he wants to stay, and he's mentioned that he's had good conversations with them already. He talked in his exit meetings or exit interviews. He called it very optimistic of him sticking around. I do anticipate there's a good chance that ends up getting to the finish line. I don't think he's going to turn around and say, well, I made 11 last year, I want 8 now. I don't think it's going to be that type of number. You're probably looking at something in that 5 to 6 range. I think if you get, and I've said this a number of times, I said it a bunch last week, if you get, John Tavares at 2 times 5, you're looking at $10 million over 2 years. I think you sign up for that any day of the week. Absolutely. With the anticipation that he's probably not going to hit 38 goals again. But can he be a 30-goal, 70-point guy and a guy who can be utilized either as your second-line center or your second-line left winger? It gives them a little bit of options here to work with. And to have a 70-point guy making $5 million or $5.5 or, in that 5 to 6 range, I think is, especially nowadays, that's a heck of a bargain. And, maybe it's a little more than that. I thought initially in the middle of the season it'd be in that 7 range, but it sounds like it's trickled down a little bit. Even though his production was maintained. You're going to look around the league. It's not a deep free agent pool. So I think that's also going to factor in to what the Leafs want to do with John Tavares. But they've expressed interest in keeping him as much as he's expressed interest in wanting to stay. Just a matter of finding the right numbers.
Yeah, and further still to that, like there's a price to be paid for the locker room presence, because if they lose him, they've lose someone who, he handled the transition of captaincy of this hockey team extremely professionally. And that definitely had an effect on the team, because he is still their de facto captain in that locker room, I'm certain. And to lose him, it's not just the points off the board, because, Knies will probably have more next year, and they can find points with all those people around those top 2 lines. But if there's a price to be paid to keep him in the mix, in the role, in the leadership role off the ice. Is that probably accurate?
Yeah, without question. As important as what guys bring on the ice, it's almost equally as important as what they bring off it. And to have, he's not the most outgoing individual from a public perspective, but he is one of the in-room glue guys from a professional standpoint. There's a lot of value. And if you're accepting the fact that you're likely losing Mitch Marner, who is another in-the-room kind of glue guy, the guys love him. He carries himself publicly a lot different than he does behind the scenes. But you're going to lose that piece. And, how much of it do you want to lose? So that's going to factor in with respect to JT as well. I think there's a good chance that he sticks around. And I could see something happening there in relatively short order.
And so switching gears to Marner and another glue locker room guy, it's the general consensus on this. And I mean, no one knows because it's still the offseason, but the way the season ended, the noise we heard on the ice, we'll get to that as we close out here, but it seems like Marner is exiting Toronto. He's got a young family. He's running these decisions by them. He's got to decide where he builds the next chapter of his life, whether he wants to stay in this intense media market or whether the Leafs and him will mutually agree that they are parting ways, or what's going to happen with Mitch Marner?
Yeah, he's going to have those conversations with his family, with his agent Darren Ferris, and they'll eventually relay that message to Brad Treliving and Leafs. I think this season took an emotional toll on him, especially towards the end, especially in the playoffs. Last memory as a Leaf might be getting booed when he touched the puck. Like that's rough. And this market has a tendency of finding a whipping boy and being relentless when it comes to that. Unfortunately, you're going to likely see the Leafs lose out on a 100-point player. And there's not really much they're going to be able to do about it unless you're giving this guy, $15 million a year. I don't see a scenario where, I don't think he's closed the door completely on returning. But I think it's as open as it is wanting to field other offers, field other calls. I think they'll be part of the mix. But if he ultimately stays here, I think it's going to take a serious number to make that happen. Because he went through, again, especially down the stretch, he went through a lot off the ice, him and his family. And he kind of alluded to a little bit of that when asked at the exit interviews, obviously not wanting to get too much into it. But, everything that you start to hear, some fans out there can be a little too wicked. And I think it affected the family and him. And I think that's part of the reason why it'll lead to him, at the very least, taking calls on July 1st.
Yeah, there's almost a confluence of circumstance here from the offensive output season he just had, the media market he plays in, because frankly, at times it's not fair. Like that last impression, and let's not forget too, this is a humongous percentage of a fan base that thought he was a hero from the Four Nations Cup, right? They're like, he's played at but we can't pretend the Four Nations Cup, which is a high level men's league game, is the same as the NHL playoffs against the Florida Panthers. Yeah. It just does not factor out that way, but it just seems like if he's on the way out the door, but if he were to stay, then you've also somewhat financially handicapped the team from making the changes everyone feels they need to be, because they won't have as much money to bring guys in or to resign the other two. Like if they resign all three of these guys, you're essentially running the same team back. Yeah. And this is the biggest fear of the fan base.
Yeah. Unless there's some additional creativity, unless you're going to Morgan Riley and going, Mo, I know you got a full no move. Would you consider other options? Or if you keep Mitch, does that mean you're not going to allocate $5-6 million for John Tavares because you want to go elsewhere? I think part of the reasoning why Toronto wants to get a full understanding of where Mitch's head is at is because it's going to affect other roster decisions for them, obviously, but current roster decisions, not potential targets. Even if he doesn't go, I've got to imagine there might be a conversation with Riley's camp as well to see is there an openness to exploring alternatives, even with his no move. Now, same agent as John Tavares, so that could be a quick little conversation or sidebar as part of the main Tavares discussion. But it wouldn't shock me if something like that came into play as well.
Okay, so under the assumption that he is going to exit Toronto, which is it is what it is.
Yeah.
Where does he fit?
You'll have 31 teams, at least inquire. I think you're going to see teams like LA, like Utah, like Chicago, Anaheim, San Jose, Philly, Calgary, even Vegas have serious.
Come on, there's only 12 more teams in the NHL left. Keep going.
I think those will be
but it's
the ones
he's an elite A-list player, of course.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't
you? And he hasn't indicated anything either, right? Like, he hasn't hinted at where he would potentially like to find I'm sure that's tight-lipped up to now.
Yeah, I think he definitely has, and this goes back to last offseason, right? When there were some trade discussions in and around the draft, some inquiries made and whatnot. When after his and then going into July after his the full no move was in place. I think he has an internal list. I don't know all the teams on it, but I know he's got an internal list of like, here's where I'd like to go. Here's where I'd be most interested in going.
Yeah.
I think that's a 6-7 team list. Does it expand because another team enters the fold and is convincing in their presentation? Yeah, perhaps.
Sure.
But we got to wait till July 1 before that process starts. I think they've got a good idea of which teams are likely to be in the mix. There's always creative ways of avoiding the whole tampering thing. But we'll see kind of, how that progresses as we get closer to draft, as we get closer to July. And this could also be a scenario where, the Leafs, if they want to retain any type of asset, say, all right, well, which are the teams that you would rather go to? And let's see if we could trade your rights there and get a third-round pick or something out of it. I don't think this is going to be a sign-and-trade scenario. He's not an RFA. And why would a team give up significant assets when you can just go after him July 1?
Exactly.
But
that's where he wants to play.
Right. But let's say he wants to go to Chicago. He wants to go to LA, for example. Okay, well, pick up the phone. Hey, do you want to get a head start on this? You're one of the top teams he would consider, give us a third or a second or something like that to get that extra week buffer to try to lock him in.
All right. So let's close out by talking about how the Leaf season ended, and more specifically, the fan reactions, during the third period of Game 7, the booing anytime Marner touched the puck, all of that bad-looking stuff. But now we're seeing what this Florida Panthers team has been doing to the Carolina team. And does it is that sort of a signal for the temperature to drop a little in Toronto and go, we just met the wrong team at the wrong time. A juggernaut, they kind of limped into the playoffs with injuries and suspensions, and they were a little flat towards the end of the season. And then championship mode just started like that as soon as they got into the playoffs. And they're only getting better as we go on. Despite the loss, they're still up 3-1, and that series has not been close.
Yep.
So is it time to reevaluate, or, the plan that everyone's got in their head is the Leafs team needs to get tougher. They need to make some changes. They need to let Marner walk. Is it all systems go on that and continue to redesign, or did you just meet Florida at the worst possible time? What are we looking at here?
I think it's a combo. I think it's a combo of you did meet Florida at the wrong time, but it also emphasized the pieces that you lack. And what Brad Treliving spoke about last offseason was adding intangibles. You have skill, now we need the intangibles, and they reshaped their blue line. They solidified goaltending, and they enhanced their bottom six. Now you have to have those intangible pieces, going back to what I talked about at the start with the power forward element. You got to have those intangible pieces within your top six. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the more significant change will happen this offseason. Obviously, you're going to lose Mitch. You're going to need to replace him. But what caliber player are you going to look to replace him with? I think Sam Bennett, by the way, stays in Florida. So for me, I think that's out of the options, not just for Toronto, but any team that would have wanted to pursue him. But what other options are going to be available, both via trade and free agency? Are there other elements where you can bring in skill, but also bring in somebody else within your top six that has that physical element to you? So, you met Florida at the wrong time, but it emphasized some of the pieces that you still lack on this team. They made good strides. They made big strides. And the system and structure that Craig Berube has brought in has complemented a lot of the changes that have been made. Now bring in more pieces that really put them over the top and go from there. I don't have a problem with fans voicing their frustration and booing and all that stuff. To me, it's when you start throwing crap on the ice that it's you're a bonehead.
And while they were skating too, it wasn't like it was between whistles. That was an ugly look. That was classless.
Yeah. There were, I think, 2 instances. I think one was caught on camera, another wasn't, where there was memorabilia thrown on the ice, and then some bonehead chucked the beer or Coke or whatever it was and splashed across right by the blue line. And there were a few other situations there. The jersey thing, I think you're silly. Don't do that.
They're expensive.
Yeah, right.
Why would you do that?
You're going to throw like the guys that are burning jerseys and all that stuff. Like, you can do whatever you want with it at home.
Sure.
Just don't throw crap on the ice because it's a bad look. And I think Nylander almost skated over one of the jerseys at one point.
And that's why it was been talked about too.
Yeah.
So
it's a bad look. And if you're chucking a full beer at somebody, clonk someone in the head with that, that's a whole other problem. And now you get caught on that. And I think it was the guy that did throw the one. I'm pretty sure I saw him getting escorted out. You clock somebody, your criminal fine's gone up a little bit. So, just don't be a jackass and don't throw stuff on the ice. You want to boo them. If that's what you want to do, if you want to voice your frustration, no problem. But the other stuff is a little much. But we'll see. You're going to lose a 100-point player and cry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Be ready when he bites you.
All right. Well, we'll leave things there, David. But, in summary, the season ended ugly for the Leafs, but I think there is a lot of room here for optimism. Would you agree?
100%. Yeah. It's not like, and I know it wasn't a 5-game series like a couple of years ago,
exactly.
Right? There were a lot of strides made. You lost in 7 games in round 1 last season. You lost in 7 games to Florida this season. I get that you got smacked around in games 5 and 7, but you still pushed to get to that point. There should be a lot of optimism going into this offseason. And how much you'll have going into the season, that's going to be up to Brad Treliving.
All right. I want to thank once again David Pagnotta for joining us here in the Toronto Sports Rush channel on the YouTube network, brought to you by Bet Rivers. You can see more of his work. He's the editor-in-chief of The Fourth Period, host and analyst for SiriusXM NHL, and of course the NHL Network. David, I'm sure, given the many, many facets of this offseason, we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Sounds good, man. Take it easy.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.